Time out! We are in the end of the end times. Tribulation is around the corner. Well, Oscar, it sounds like our last time out video got some attention, so I figure we should unpack that a little bit and see if I can skip my student loan payments. Hey everyone, my name is Josh. Welcome to Overtime, a series of videos where we look at some of the most popular comments in the comment section on our Time Out series, and we do a deep dive to unpack the discussion a bit more and have some dialogue. If you're a Christian watching this video, we hope you'll walk away feeling encouraged about your faith, and if you're not a Christian, we hope you'll at least better understand the positions we hold and why we believe them. So this week, we're looking at the idea of eschatology, which is a real fancy way of asking the question, when's the world gonna end? This has been a big part of almost all cultures, regardless of religious conviction. Christians, Jews, even the Mayans with the calendar thing in 2012. The list goes on and on and on. Christians believe that the study of the end times is crucial because it reminds us that we need to have a sharp focus on the lives that we are living now. The things that we do in this world matter. How we love people, how we serve, how we interact, because all of these have an impact on the way that people process and understand the person of Jesus. Because hopefully, when people interact with us, they see Christ. And we want as many people to say yes to Jesus so we can be in heaven together when the end eventually does arrive. So the first thing we're going to look at is what's called Amillennialism. This is a clear giveaway to its defining mark. The A plus the word millennialism literally means that there's no literal, open, visible 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. Instead, the reign of Christ is understood in a fundamentally different way. Amillennialism does not have a specific antichrist as advocated in something like the Left Behind series. However, there may be a person of sin, like 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-12 says. Now, with the reign of Christ, amillennial thinkers note rightly that there is this 1,000-year language describing the millennial period in Revelation 20, which can be interpreted figuratively. So the 1,000-year period isn't a specific 1,000-year cycle on an actual calendar. Instead, with his resurrection and ascension, Christ has already begun his reign. He presently rules on earth, which is known as the millennial age, through his people, and he will return physically at any moment to usher in the heavens on earth. Now, in this position, Satan's influence has been diminished because he has been bound by Christ. Satan himself is not presently exerting influence over the world. Now, for amillennialism with Israel and the church, there's no real stark contrast between the two. Rather, the church is the spiritual Israel because Christ is true Israel. This does not mean, however, that the church has replaced Israel as a whole, but instead that the church is the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham that his offspring, Jesus, would bless all the nations. Some key passages to look for here are John 5, Romans 8, 2 Peter 3, 2 Thessalonians. And some notable representatives of the amillennialism position are Augustine of Hippo, Martin Luther, John Calvin, Louis Berkhoff, C.S. Lewis, and R.C. Sproul. You have very likely never met a committed proponent of postmillennialism. That was not always the case because early in American history, postmillennialism was kind of in a sense a real American eschatology. Now, it's a theological peculiarity to kind of hear someone speak of these postmillennial ideas, partly because it's really difficult to kind of nail down and quantify. Not only is it a minority position, but even the thinkers within the position tend to disagree with all of the details. Regarding Israel and the church, the postmillennial position agrees with amillennialism. The church is the fulfillment of Israel. The church is the spiritual Israel. Some key passages here: Psalm 2, Isaiah 2, Matthew 13 and 28, and John 12. Some notable representatives here are Jonathan Edwards, B.B. Warfield, Greg Bonson, Lorraine Bettner, Kenneth Gentry, Peter Leithart. Now for our third position, premillennialism. This is often assumed to be the default view of Christians in America, and this is understandable because it's presently the most common view of eschatology held by American evangelicals. While evangelicals are mostly familiar with primary framework of premillennial thought, many are unaware that premillennialism has two major divisions. We have historic premillennialism, which is the traditional form, and dispensational premillennialism, which is usually called dispensationalism. So historic premillennialism for the reign of Christ believes that Christ will return physically and visibly in order to usher in the millennial reign. But historic premillennialists disagree as to whether the reign of Christ will be a literal 1,000 years or just a long period of time. Premillennialist position holds that Satan is currently at work in the world, influencing affairs and deceiving the nations. At the return of Christ, Satan will be bound for the duration of the millennial age. Now regarding Israel and the church, historic premillennialism presupposes that the church is the spiritual fulfillment of Israel in a manner that is very similar to both and postmillennialism. The distinction between the systems has to do with interpretation. Now, premillennialism places a heavier emphasis on rigidly literal interpretations of key passages than either or postmillennialism does. There are some notable representatives here. We have Irenaeus, Wayne Grudem, Robert Gundry, Ben Witherington III, and Craig Blomberg. The majority of dispensationalists believe that the millennial reign will begin after Christ's return at the end of a distinct 7-year period known as the tribulation. The millennial reign of Christ begins at the third coming of Christ. So dispensationalists propose a secret rapture concept in which Christ returns prior to or midway through the tribulation period to actually remove the church from the earth. Now, when we talk about the role of Satan, like historical premillennialism, dispensationalists argue that Satan is actively at work to resist the church and to undermine God's people. And he will be bound ultimately for the duration of the millennium, only released for a final confrontation following that 1,000-year captivity. Now, for these key passages, a key difference here is Daniel 9 on the 70 weeks as a key passage for interpreting the arc of history as a whole. Additionally, classic dispensationalism proposes that the content of the Bible is actually divided along 7 dispensations or eras. Now, while different schools of dispensationalism categorize these eras differently, one common structure is innocence, conscience, human government, promise, law, grace, and the millennium. Key passages are interpreted through this dispensational framework. Some notable representatives here are Lewis Schaeffer, John Walverwood, Charles Rye, Hal Lindsey, and John MacArthur. Ronald Hayne, the early church historian, has a quote that sums up these 4 positions pretty well that I like. It says, "No one ever seems to have been pronounced heretical solely on the basis of his or her understanding of Revelation 20. We should learn from that toleration of diverse views in the early church and let that example guide us in our thinking about the millennial question." Now, it's tempting to identify the oldest Christian position on the end times as the correct one, but we need to examine a position's faithfulness to the Bible, not how old it is or how many people hold to it. If it's the oldest Christian stance is the right one on every issue, we're kind of in big trouble. You see, despite differences of the millennial age, the events leading up to the return of Christ, and the relationship between Israel and the church, these eschatologies agree about more than they disagree. None of these deny the basic eschatology of the Apostles' Creed, that Jesus will come to judge the living and the dead, and we share one central hope in Jesus' victory. In that, however, it's important to note that Revelation is a real book situated in a specific time, and it's highly likely that John, Revelation's author, assumed that the empire that we have seen come to represent so many different kingdoms, the USA, China, Russia, just to name a few in the last 100 years, was most likely the Roman Empire. And this is where we want to take a step back in time and think about things through the literal biblical perspective as opposed to necessarily trying to interpret the message for what it might mean for us in our position. And the person I want to look at for this is the Apostle Paul. And Paul exists in what's called this now/not yet eschatological paradigm. Gordon Fee, the scholar, in his analysis of Paul's letter to the Philippians, puts it beautifully. He writes, "The fundamental framework for all of Paul's theologizing, especially for salvation in Christ, is in his eschatological understanding of the present existence, as both already and not yet. You see, with the resurrection of Christ and the gift of the promised Holy Spirit, God has already set the future inexorably in motion. Thus, salvation is already, but the consummation of salvation awaits the now second coming of Christ. The day in Christ," Paul calls it in Philippians 1 and 2, "thus salvation has not yet been fully realized." The fact that the future has already begun with the coming of God himself through Christ and the Spirit means 2 crucial things for the person of Paul: that the consummation is absolutely guaranteed, and that the present existence is therefore altogether determined by this reality. That is, one's life in the present is not conditioned or determined by present exigencies, but by the singular reality that God's people belong to the future that has already come present, marked by Christ's death and resurrection, and identified as God's people by the gift of the Spirit. They live the life of the future in the present, determined by its values and perspectives, no matter what their present circumstances may be. So we've been in the end times since Jesus ascended to heaven. We are waiting with great anticipation for God to return to earth, to set things correctly, and to bring about making heaven a reality here. However, in the meantime, there's still a great work to do. We must participate in the work that God is doing on this earth because we are called to do it. And this is one thing I want to stress more than anything else in this conversation. So often I'll see particular Christian groups get so focused on the end time that it becomes the primary focus of their theology. And Jesus tells us that he will not be returning until all people have had a chance to hear the gospel preached. Now, the stats on this are staggering. 1 in 5 people still don't have the Bible in their own language. See, as of now, there are 7,353 languages spoken in the world, and only 698 of them have a full Bible in their language. You see, we still have quite some time before Jesus is coming back, most likely. However, it's important to remember a few things here. The family who has a sick child and needs prayer and help may not really care if you're a post or premillennialist, and the kid who is being made fun of because of their skin color doesn't care if you maintain an amillennialist position. They're looking for Jesus in the here and now, and it's your and my job to be that person in the here and now. Now, don't mishear me. I'm not creating a false dilemma fallacy. You can care about both of these things. However, I do want to bring these situations up to remind us to not be so heavenly minded that we're no earthly good. We're still living in the here and now. We have an obligation, like Jesus says, to live out the prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, both here and now. Thank you so much for watching the video, and until next time, we'll see you in the comments.